Chapter 2. Let's talk about the economics of energy generation and conservation systems. And this is one of the reasons that I wish we could team up with the management school, because this is way beyond my expertise. So if I sound confused, it's because I partly am. So don't feel bad. But you need to hear this stuff, even if I don't do it justice. All right. Why do people invest in energy projects? So okay, I should back up. People are always saying, why doesn't the government do something to make more renewable energy? And the government, the federal and state government, have limited leverage. Their leverage is mostly in the way of offering subsidies or tax benefits or something like that. They can't really make it happen. It's got to be the private sector that decides to invest in this project or that project. On the other hand, the fact that the government is relatively ineffective in controlling energy means that even with a change of administrations from a pro-renewable energy administration to a anti-renewable energy administration has less of an effect than you might think. And there's no place where that is clearer than the state of Texas. The state of Texas is a very red state, and the Republican Party, at least their leader, have been remarkably against renewable energy. But that doesn't really affect investors, because they make their own decisions. And obviously, whether or not there are tax benefits is going to be part of that decision. But just because the government naysays it, if it's not illegal and they think they can make a good return on investment, they're going to invest. And that's what's been happening in the state of Texas. So why do people invest in energy projects? Well, they want to make money. And all investment is based on projections of risk and reward. Reward is making money. The risk is losing money. So thoughtful investment is based on projections of what it will be, what it will bring in versus what it will cost. This, unfortunately, requires mathematics. So in this chapter, we're going to be discussing 9 factors that investors and companies use to evaluate the rewards and risks on possible projects. The unit cost of energy, we've sort of talked about that with the levelized cost of energy. The payback period, right? If you invest X dollars, when do you get your X plus dollars back? The time value of money, which is related to the discount rate. This is a very non-geologic topic, but we are talking about money, so all of us have a feel for that to a certain extent. We have to talk about inflation and how that affects the cost of money via the nominal discount rate, and the present value analysis, which very much, a management kind of an activity. We've got the total life cycle costs, and then the internal rate of return, the capital recovery factor, the levelized cost of energy, which is an extremely important consideration, and the societal and environmental costs, right? You don't want to spend time in the court with a project. That takes money and time, 2 things that investors are not wanting to waste a lot of. So let's talk about the unit cost of energy, or C sub S. So C naught is the capital cost for a project, and T is the life of the system, and Q is the value of energy produced per unit time. So the unit cost of energy is the capital cost divided by the value, that the total amount of energy produced per unit of time, its value. So this is, book gives an example of calculating this for a solar panel and comes up with a unit cost of 11 cents per kilowatt hour. This is an ultra simplified levelized cost of energy. So the unit cost of energy, the levelized cost of energy, they're sort of philosophically linked, although they're a bit different. All right, so remember we talked about the levelized cost of energy, and here we've got these examples. So you're an investor, you're going to be looking at these going, well, we'll talk about gas peaking later. You'll understand why this is still happening compared to this. But you can see that, an investor is going to be looking at the things that are lowest, right? Because you get the same amount of money per unit of energy. Who cares what it comes from? Although that's slightly more complicated. But the solar photovoltaic now is extremely competitive with the cheapest fossil fuel conventional generation, which is gas combined cycle. The only thing is, this is intermittent. This is baseload. So wind is also onshore comparable. Okay. Any questions about these sorts of things? All right. Now the payback period. So the payback period is how long it takes to pay back the original investment. So, and this interestingly applies to both energy conservation or energy production projects. So here this C naught is the cost of installation. B sub I is the amount of energy saved or created, and C sub S is the unit cost of energy saved or created. So we can modify that, lifetime cost of energy to include energy savings. So this calculation assumes that no loans were used to pay for the installation, which is generally not the case. So here we've got an example your book gives. A new natural gas power plant costs $600 per kilowatt to build. So according to the book, so that's a little bit out of date. So a new 200 megawatt plant would cost 600 times 200,000 equals 120 million. Now the little asterisk here, there are at least 176 natural gas power plants. 20 will be added in 2024. Each of these has a capacity about 385 megawatts. So if you're going to borrow $120 million to do this project, how do you figure out what does that really cost for the company in terms of cost projections? So just to show here, June of 2025, we had 130 natural gas power plant projects proposed in Texas with different sizes, in part to feed the artificial intelligence boom and data centers. And talk about how much new generating capacity to the grid. So these are mostly gas, right? There's a new gas plant, there's an expansion of existing plants, and there's a funny yellow one there over on the right, which is an expansion restart. I guess it was an old plant that they're rebuilding. And then the size of these circles is showing you the generating capacity, and you can see where they are, right? They're near the population centers in the eastern part of the state. So here's a couple of interesting new projects. So this is the Legend Power Station. This is artist rendition, and this is the Lone Star Power Station. So the Legend Power Station is a proposed 754 megawatt combined cycle combustion turbine facility. We haven't talked about that yet. We will. But you may remember that gas combined cycle is the least expensive with levelized cost of interest, by comparison to gas peaking, which is much more expensive. So that's why they're building it like that. And they said the project will feature a hydrogen capable combustion turbine in case hydrogen becomes a thing. The project's expected to cost about $1.6 billion or $2,100 per kilowatt. Now that one is at Port Arthur. The other one's near Cleveland. is planned to be 453 megawatt hydrogen capable combustion turbine, and it's going to be cheaper, only about 800 million. And they're both expected to enter service by 2028 and bring in a total of $2.8 billion in economic benefits to the region. So, all right, now your book talks about the time value of money. So money is sort of changes in value over the time. So one way you can see that is, interest on your savings. You get a little bit extra every year, interest. So with time, it increases. Now, on the other hand, money decreases in value with time because of inflation. So let's see if we have time to get into that today, or if we're going to just, oh yeah, we can get into this. All right, so here we've got an equation. It looks a lot like the exponential growth curve. So the value of money at any time t is equal to P, the present value of money, times this quantity 1 plus interest. Okay? So another way to think about that, this could be the money that you have in your bank. Another one is if a company is trying to figure out how much money this project will bring in over time, then this is the present value of money equals the future value of money divided by 1 plus I, right? The future dollar is worth less than the present dollar. Okay? So the present worth factor of future money is equal to PWF, is a function of both the interest rate and the time, is just 1 over I plus T. So you're not going to be asked to memorize that on the exam, by the way. Consider what the discount rate is, and this can be very confusing. So the discount rate is in the news now, right? President Trump wants the Fed to lower the discount rate, and the discount rate he's talking about is the interest rate charged to commercial banks and other financial institutions for short-term loans they take from the Federal Reserve Bank. So here we can see this was January, and this week it was 3.75%. A month ago it was 3.75. A year ago it was 4.5. So the discount rate has come down a little bit, and that translates into other lending rates. Now, the second definition of the discount rate is different. It refers to the interest rate used in discounted cash flows analysis, or DCF, to determine the present value of future cash flows, right? If we invest in something with X dollars today, what's it going to be worth in the future? And here's a cartoon. We just, Doc Bert, we don't need any of your intuition mumbo jumbo. We need quantitative data. And then the only way to make decisions is to pull numbers out of the air, call them assumptions, and calculate the net present value. Of course, you have to use the right discount rate, otherwise it's meaningless. So I thought that was funny for those in the know, and I guess we're all in the know now. All right, so here we've got a handful. This is definitely a complicated equation. So we're looking at the present value of money, which is equal to the fixed future cash flows that might occur regularly. Let's say payments from consumers to a company. So there we've got the interest rate and the time in both. So they gave the book gave an example of a 10% discount rate for $500 paid out at $100 annually over 5 years. And using that, it's worth $379 today. Yes. So I didn't finish the sentence there, but the point is that you have to think about these things when you're doing an investment consideration. So this present worth concept is used in energy management and conservation strategies. So now the book talks about inflation, which is obviously something that has to be affected too. So current dollars is the actual cash flow constant dollars are built around a base year, usually when the project starts, which would be zero. So then the future dollar equivalent, F sub t, of a current F naught amount after t years with an inflation rate of J is there. So, for example, a project costing $100 today, assuming 4% inflation, would cost $148 in 10 years. So you've got two competing estimates of the future value of money and the what it will cost to delay developing a project. Okay, any questions about that? It's stuff that the management school would teach in great detail, but we certainly need to know about it because these are the kinds of considerations that companies and investors make. So there's a thing called the nominal discount rate, and that is the real discount rate plus the inflation rate. And this is a little confusing to me because I would have thought the nominal discount rate would be basically what the banks are charging and the inflation rate would be added on top of it, but it's just the other way around. The nominal discount rate is the return on investment required to invest in a project in this example. So here we've got the equation. The nominal discount rate is equal to the real discount rate plus the inflation rate. So in 2025, we were looking at 2.7% inflation. So, for example, the inflation rate of 6% and a real discount rate of 4%, the nominal discount rate is 10%. Okay. Any questions? All right. So the present value analysis has to take in effects of inflation. So the present value analysis is a financial technique that determines the current value, F sub naught, of future cash flows, F sub t. And it's based on the idea that we've already talked about, that money today is worth more than the same amount in the future because it could be invested somewhere else and earn a return. So here we got the present value of a current F naught of a future dollar equivalent FT amount after T years with a nominal discount rate of I prime. So here we're looking at the inflation rates for the United States over 100 years on top. And then right here, we're looking at, where we are. So, there's been some very high peaks of inflation at different times. In the 70s and 80s, I remember we bought our first house, the interest rate was 10%. And there have been times when the inflation is actually negative, but not very often. That was 2008. And this little box here is what we're looking at here, 10 years, right? There's COVID, basically nobody needed any money. They just needed masks. And then after COVID, inflation rate took off. That was a huge discussion in the election. Even though inflation had died away by the election time, people still remembered that. And then here we are, it's pretty flat, maybe declining a little bit, but it's hard to get much lower than that. Okay. So now, the book then goes into total life cycle costs of a project. So it considers all of the significant dollar costs over the life of a project, and the costs are discounted to a base year using present value analysis. And here's the formula for calculating the present value of total life cycle costs. That mathematical expression does not need to be memorized, but you can just see that it's basically looking at the sum of the costs in current dollars in period T with N analysis periods and I prime being the nominal discount rate. So TLC sometimes, usually we're thinking about tender loving care, but it was also a 1990s US girl singing group. And I'm not sure it's related to TLCC, but. Okay, so since major costs associated with conservation and renewable energy technologies are initial investments and have costs of operation and maintenance, the formula for residential, government, and nonprofit organization projects looks like this. total lifetime costs equals the initial investment plus the present value of all operations and maintenance costs. So now, if the investment's by a for-profit company, then you have to have business taxes. So that's that formula where PVDEP is equal to present value of depreciation. We're getting into the weeds now, but it's important for businesses to think about these things. All right, so here's an example. A nonprofit invests $110,000 in double-paned windows, which we saw are good ways to save energy. So it costs $1,300 of operation and maintenance yearly for painting, and there's no salvage value. So assume the book assumes about inflation rate of 3% with a nominal discount rate of 12%. So here's your investment, right? Year zero, they figure it's going to be good for 5 years. And here are your annual costs, which can be discounted, right? And then here's the total lifetime cycle cost is $15,091. So that applies to any project, whether it's building a new energy generation or energy conservation. So here's an example for a private company in a 34% federal income tax bracket and no state income tax. So they go through this in the fourth column. And anyway, it's a different number. All right. Now, then the book goes on to the internal rate of return, which is a net present value. So the internal rate of return of investment that has a series of future cash flows, right? Is that rate of return on investment that causes net present value to equal zero? Now, this is sort of a calculation method. And this IRR is a very useful concept for comparing investment possibilities. And it's commonly used by companies to make accept or reject decisions based on comparing project internal rate of return with the minimum acceptable rate, which is sometimes called the hurdle rate. And John, if you know anything more about this stuff that you want to add on, feel free. I know you're more familiar with a lot of this stuff than I am.
You're doing a good job.
Okay, thanks. Let's watch a video.
In this video, I'm going to be talking about IRR, otherwise known as the internal rate of return. Now, the internal rate of return is a way of evaluating a project and coming up with a decision to accept or reject that project. Okay, so this is very similar in a way to NPV. Now, when we think about NPV, we think if the NPV is greater than 0, then accept. That's the decision. That's our decision rule. So IRR is kind of related in that sense, and that ultimately it's going to lead to a decision rule. But first, in order to understand what IRR is, let's kind of work a problem here with NPV and then show how we do it with IRR. So let's say that we've got some project. So we've got an example here. We have a project, and this project is going to have, it's just going to be a 1-year timeline. And at the beginning of or at year 0, right now, we're going to have a cash outflow. We're going to invest $100. So that's a negative 100. And then at the end of year 1, we're going to receive a cash flow of $130. So this is a very simple project here, paying out $100 and then getting $130 back at the end. Now, in order to calculate this with our NPV, the other way, holding off IRR for a second and thinking about NPV, we're going to need to know the discount rate. Okay, little r, we'll call that. And so let's just say that the discount rate, let's say it's 8%. Right. Now, I'm just briefly going to go through how we would do this under NPV. And refer to the NPV video if you haven't seen this yet. The NPV is going to be negative 100, that cash outflow, plus 130, but we're going to take that over 1 plus R, 1 plus that discount rate. And we need to do that because of the time value of money. So ultimately, that NPV, this is going to be 130 over 1.08. With this 0.08, we're just that's just that 8% discount rate. We're converting it to a decimal and adding 1 to it. And ultimately, this is going to give us a net present value to this project of $20.37. So now if we think about our decision rule, well, is this greater than 0? Well, yes, it is. So then according to the NPV, you would accept this project and go ahead with it. But let's think about IRR now. Well, how is IRR different from NPV? Well, ultimately, what we're going to do with IRR, let me just say IRR here now so I make this clear. I don't want you getting confused. So with IRR, we are going to set the NPV equal to 0. We're going to set the NPV equal to 0. So then we're going to still have that negative 100, the cash outflow, that thing from here, that's still coming down. And then we're going to have 130 over, and this time I'm going to have 1 plus, but I'm going to put big R instead of little r. We're still going to have little r over here being our 8% discount rate. You say, okay, well, what is this big R then? What is the difference between big R and little r? Well, what we're going to do is we're going to try and solve this and figure what is the big R that we would have to plug in that would make this equation so that the NPV is equal to 0. So, and then once we've determined what R is, we're going to take R and compare it to that 8%, and that's going to be our decision rule. So let's go ahead and let's just solve this for a second. So ultimately, we're setting the NPV equal to 0, and then we're solving for the R that would make this equation true. So ultimately, you can do some algebra here, but you'll end up with an R that is equal to 0.3, 0.30. I'm going to say because we're going to convert that to a percent, so we can easily compare these two. So we've got the big R is 30%, and then the little r is 8%. So what does that tell us? Well, we know that 30% is greater than 8%. Okay, well, what does that tell us? Well, if the big R, our decision rule, if big R is greater, if big R is greater than little r, then accept. Okay, that's our decision rule. Now let's think about what this means here conceptually. What we're trying to do is we're saying, okay, the NPV, we're ultimately going to say that's kind of our break-even point, so to speak, because when the NPV is 0, what does that mean? That means that wealth is neither being added nor destroyed at the firm, because you're just earning this opportunity cost or cost of capital, however you want to think about it. You're just getting that 8%. So that's this NPV. When it's 0, that's our break-even point, and we're saying what return would we have to have? What big R would there need to be in order to get the NPV to equal 0, to get to that break-even point? And we see that, okay, well, we have a return there of 30% would make the NPV equal to 0. And then we say, okay, well, let's compare that 30% to what our opportunity cost of the capital is, or our discount rate, however we want to think about it. And let's see if it's larger. And then we look and we say, okay, clearly the answer yes. So ultimately, we can think of IRR is the discount rate that makes the NPV equal to 0. That makes NPV equal to 0 to get us to that break-even point. We just ultimately say, instead of calculating the NPV directly, which we did under the NPV decision rule, we're just going to set NPV equal to 0, and then solve for the R, the big R, that would make this equation true, where we find that big R that makes the NPV equal to 0, compare it to our discount rate, and if it's greater, then we accept the project.
Okay, so that, I think, explained it,
In this picture,
a lot better, don't you think? All right, then your book goes on to talk about the capital recovery factor, which is the ratio of a uniform payment, sometimes called an annuity, to the present value of receiving that annuity for a given length of time. So one way is think about it as a series of equal periodic payments needed to pay off a loan. So this is a self-amortizing loan, and home mortgages are good examples of these. And in the book explains what a self-amortizing loan is, where the payments don't change, but the entire, amount is paid out. So we don't have to go into that in detail. Unless you have questions. And then your book talks about this, with this P annual being the annual payments. So this is the sum of the payments for the self-amortizing loan and the interest. Then you can calculate the annual payment. That's what they do when you're setting up a home loan, and then the capital recovery factor can be calculated. So most solar energy systems owned by private companies or individuals are purchased with self-amortizing loans. So this, those of you that have a house that are made loans on it, you know this, that, over a 30-year loan, you're going to make the same payment, right? Now, at the beginning and the end, the loans end at different times, but in between, you're making the same payment, but that payment is going to different amounts of principal and interest. At first, you're putting all the money is pretty much is paying off interest, and then it starts in a small amount, but over time, the amount that's using to pay off the principal becomes bigger and bigger. So that's 30-year self-amortizing loan. Okay, now back to the levelized cost of energy, which is a very important concept for this class, which companies and investors use to compare different energy generation technologies. And this is defined as the cost that, if assigned to every unit of energy produced or saved by the technology over the analysis period, would equal the total life cycle costs when discounted back to the base year. So complicated equation. Here we're using Q sub I as the electricity generated or saved in kilowatt hours by the system, and as the analysis period, and C sub T is the after-tax cash flow in year T. So we've talked a bit about Lazar's levelized cost of energy that come out every year from Lazard. And the LCOE can use either a real or a nominal discount rate. And we can calculate the LCOE in terms of the total life cycle costs. And this is, these equations are used. Now, you don't have to memorize all these equations. The point is that you need to understand the basis on which companies make decisions. And we're seeing that in Texas now, that, politically, renewable energy is very much frowned on by the federal government, at least. But the investor community is quite independent of them for the most part, and they make these decisions based on nothing to do with politics. So here the book gives you an example of calculating a total life cycle costs and levelized cost of energy for replacing a 70-watt incandescent bulb with 900 lumens with a 40-watt fluorescent bulb at 700 lumens. And you assume 6 hours per day, so that's 164 kilowatt hours per year. Incandescent bulbs need to be replaced, yearly cost of $1, while fluorescent bulbs last 5 years and cost $15. And the cost of electricity is there, and there's the discount rate. So, you can take a look at the Dallas area rates, but they're not far from what the book puts in there. A little less than 9 cents to about a little less than 20 cents a kilowatt hour. So the total life cycle cost for incandescent replacement and electricity costs, discount over 5 years, is $51.32. And the total life cycle costs for the fluorescent replacement and electricity costs, discount over 5 years, is $40.26. So that, that makes the decision a lot easier than just saying, oh, I don't want, now it doesn't, if you don't like fluorescent light, that's another consideration that's not considered here. So now the book ends up talking about societal and environmental costs. Energy generation creates environmental and societal costs that are not considered in for the foregoing analysis. These are called externalities. So when you hear the word externalities, you're hearing things that have nothing to do with dollars and cents. And the one of the things about renewable energy is the discussion about global climate change and air pollution, all that. Those are conventional energy is associated with higher externalities than renewable energy. And we talked about natural gas versus coal. Coal imposes higher externalities than renewable energy. And of course, it's difficult to estimate costs here. This is a much more difficult field to bring into analysis. But these are some of the externality estimates were made for Europe in the late 1990s. So here we've got coal, oil, gas, nuclear, hydro, photovoltaic, wind, cogeneration. We'll talk about cogeneration later, but you can see, they divide it between the externalities associated with the power plant, and this is the rest of the activity. So the externalities for coal, according to this analysis, burning coal to make electricity is all in the power plant pretty much. Hard coal less. I don't know what that is. Oil. Gas. And so you can see the gas, the externalities, widely accepted to be much larger. Nuclear, I don't see it. Its externalities for that are really hard to evaluate. Any questions about externalities? These seem to dominate our discussions about energy so often.